Hello and welcome to the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. I'm Jake McDonnell. You can follow us on Twitter at CharmCityBW. Check out Facebook.com/CharmCityBirdwatch. We are on Instagram, and you can email us as well at CharmCityBirdwatch@gmail.com. And our website is CharmCityBirdwatch.com for all things Baltimore sports related. Again, I'm your host, Jake McDonnell. You can find me on Twitter at JMcDonnell95. And again, you are listening to this podcast through either iTunes or SoundCloud. So going on right now, we are about a month away from training camp in the Baltimore sports world. Not a lot going on the football side of things. More lately, it's been a lot of baseball talk. But today, of course, the story broke that former Ravens linebacker, I should say, Zachary Orr is coming out of retirement. He retired in January after undergoing. When he didn't undergo a surgery, he was diagnosed by Ravens team doctors with a condition that less than 1% of the population has, which one of the vertebrae in his spine is not fully developed, and therefore that Ravens team doctors told Orr that injury puts him at a high risk of paralyzing himself or even death if he were to continue playing a contact sport. So Orr retired on January 20th, but after receiving second opinions from doctors who have not been revealed, Orr says he would like to attempt an NFL comeback, whether that's for the Ravens or another team. But the something to keep in mind here is he never filed paperwork with the NFL, and the Ravens never used their restricted free agent tender on him because they assumed that he was going to stay retired. And so as a result, and if he does indeed get cleared to come back, he's been cleared by doctors but not cleared by the NFL or cleared by any other team doctors. He has not passed an NFL physical. But if he comes back, he is going to be an unrestricted free agent, free to sign with any team. So obviously, the news broke today. That you can check out a great story on CharmCityBirdwatch.com that I wrote, taking a look at whether or not I think the Ravens should bring him back or not. So to read more about my opinion, we're gonna dive into it in a minute. But for more on that, you can check the story out at CharmCityBirdwatch.com. So in tonight's episode, to break down all things Zach Orr and Orioles related, we bring in one of our staff writers here at Charm City Birdwatch, Nolan McGraw. You can follow him on Twitter at Nolan_MCG. Been doing a great job with the series recaps mainly. We haven't planned it. It wasn't planned to, me doing all the previews and him doing mainly all the recaps, but with just the way our schedules are, that's the way it's been. But he's been helping me cover all things Orioles and Ravens, especially the Dennis Pitta retirement or not retirement, I guess the injury a couple weeks ago. But welcome Nolan McGraw back on. So, with everything the Ravens have been through with Dennis Pitta, now it appears that, another former player is attempting an NFL comeback, everything with the Zach Orr situation. This story kind of strikes me as something that the Ravens might not be interested in pursuing. I'm sure Zach Orr seems like an all-class first guy, voted media good guy last year. Of course, he led the team in tackles last year. So when we hear, all the stories about him wanting to come back, I'm sure a lot of Ravens fans love the idea of him being back with the team next season. But the Ravens doctors were the ones that initially gave him the diagnosis that said, hey, you can't play anymore. And I don't think anything medically with him has changed. I know this is a condition that's not going to go away for him. And when, even though there have been doctors that he's seen since being diagnosed by the Ravens that have given him a green light to play, they're not Ravens team doctors, and we don't know what kind of doctors they are or how credible they are. And backs are scary, backs are tricky, and if you mess something up, you can do serious life-changing damage, resulting even as significant as being paralyzed, or they did mention death being one of the situations that Orr could face if he continued to play football. So kind of hard to imagine him being back on a football field and him wanting to play football again, but I guess, with him being cleared by other doctors, maybe he has a shot to play again. I'm not sure. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with pretty much everything you said. I had a chance to read your article that you posted a little bit earlier. And yeah, I'd side with you 100%. It's different than your average injury. This is something that is going to stay with him. This is something you can't, fix or improve in any way. It's always going to be there. So it's always going to be an issue, or it's always going to be a gamble, I guess you could say. But at the same time, like you said, he is a significant, player. led the team in tackles last year. It's not just some, backup guy. So the fact that people want him back, that's a great thing, but I think it might be best if he finds a new home with another team.
And he went and he was citing, about a college player that's been with the same injury. He said he had talked to a college quarterback that played for the same thing. But he said there's no actual evidence that would suggest, him being at a slightly low risk. Well, this condition that he has, he might be the only football player that's ever played with this condition. And the fact that he cited a quarterback, I guess that's respectable that a player was able to play for the same type of thing he had. But a quarterback doesn't take nearly as much of a beating to the back as, certainly a linebacker does with making all those tackles. And the other thing I want to kind of take into account is I think with everything the Ravens been through, with Dennis Pitta, him being hurt, missing so much time and coming back, he made it throughout an entire season without re-injuring the hip, which was great. But then we saw what happened again, and I think if he wants to come back to Baltimore, he's going to have to do so at a very cheap price, because I think the Ravens, after going through whatever they went through with Pitta, they don't really want to have a player that has a significant medical risk. You do talk high risk, high reward, but with everything like I keep saying too about Dennis Pitta, I just don't know if the Ravens have the time to necessarily consider that again, considering what they've been through in recent seasons.
Yeah, it's definitely a gamble. But you also mentioned in the article that money-wise, just what the Ravens are looking at right now in terms of cap space, there's plenty of other needs still on the table that it would be better for them to go after those needs instead of someone like Orr, because on defense they're very well equipped already, I would say.
Yeah, and you can talk about how he was the leading tackler on the team last year, which was great. With that being said, with him being a leading tackler and with him being a second-team All-Pro, if he does go somewhere else, the Ravens would have only paid him as a restricted free agent. They would have only paid him a couple more $1 million with a tender. He's going to want a long-term deal. He's going to want some injury waivers, honestly, and he's going to want some clauses in there. Should he get hurt again? And I don't know if the Ravens have it in the books to do that right now. I hate using that reference, but there are other needs on the team, like you alluded to. And after minicamp, we heard, as I alluded to in the post, owner Steve Machado was saying that they were going to do more work in the offensive line. And yes, I agree. There is going to be a competition. Middle linebacker is one of the spots alongside C.J. Mosley where we don't know who's going to be playing there yet. Orr was an unrestricted, or he was an undrafted rookie, but the Ravens drafted Kamalai Correa last year in the second round. They expect him to be the starting middle linebacker if he can win the job. And they have other guys. I remember number 48, Patrick is his first name. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It begins with an O. And they also drafted Tyus Bowser, who also has inside linebacker experience in the second round of the draft. So everything Orr did for the team last year, was great. He came out of nowhere. The Ravens have a history of undrafted guys like that. Bart Scott coming and doing a great job. But he retired. The Ravens went through the entire offseason thinking he wouldn't be back, and I think they should, as I said at the end of the article, they wished him well when he retired, and I think they should continue to do so, because I don't think if he's going to play again, it's going to be with the Ravens.
Yep. But at the end of the day, it's up to him. He knows his body more than anybody else, so obviously we wish him the best. If he wants to play again, go for it, definitely. I'd love to see him succeed with another team.
And before we shift over to the Orioles, I guess we can all be in unison that offensive line is, still the main priority, on the roster that they're going to have to address either before or during training camp, whether it's, signing a free agent or whether it's a trade or waiting until somebody else gets cut in camp. Would you agree with me that they still have to address their offensive line before anything else?
Yeah, definitely. That's been the last lingering issue, I guess.
Yeah, and it seems to be the general consensus is from what I understand, things could always change. They did have Nick Mangold in for a visit, of course the veteran center from the Jets, but he seems like he's going to be a little pricey. what I've gathered is they're probably going to end up going with either Urshel or Jensen at center, one of the in-house options. They like Jensen's mean streak, but it's all about staying consistent with him. And then with Urshel, smart guy, knows the ins and outs of the game, but hasn't really necessarily been physical enough in his time being a starter. So those two are going to kind of battle it out. And then right now, James Hurst is slotted to be the starting right tackle. But there are other options out there like Orlando Franklin. And there was another one I wrote about for the fan-sided page, Ryan Clady, I believe, as well. So they still have some time, to either bring one of those guys in or wait till somebody gets cut in training camp. But if they want to be competitive again this year, I think offensive line's the main hole they got to fill before they worry, if they want to plan on being contenders again. That's what they're going to have to go for. So shifting over to the Orioles now. Again, they're playing in Toronto, currently losing to the Blue Jays 4-0 in the fifth inning. Miley still in the game as of right now, facing Troy Tulowitzki. Right now, they are on a 3-game winning streak. They're right at 500 in fourth place in the American League East, 4.5 games back the Red Sox, who are now in first, and the Yankees in second place. But of course, all this could be updated after tonight. And of course, for all series previews and recaps, be sure to check out our articles at CharmCityBirdwatch.com, breaking down everything. So of course, the Orioles went through that tough 20-game stretch, tying the Major League record with the consecutive games giving up 5 runs or more. They did it at 20 games, tied the Phillies back in the 1920s. But they are on a 3-game win streak, literally a pitch away from getting a shutout last night. But Tulo hit a solo home run off of Brad Brock last night. So Nolan, I guess a couple weeks after we last spoke on the podcast, a lot bad has happened more than good. But they've seemed to be playing well against Toronto this year. Where are you right now as we sit now 2 weeks before the All-Star break with this Orioles ball club?
It's just been through this whole stretch in my mind has just been repeating over and over, can we get to the All-Star break yet? Because there's been just a lack of off days this whole stretch. And with the pitching, the starting pitching not performing well, it's just been a endless cycle. It just keeps, repeating itself, and they can't get out of it. And even though they've strung together some wins here, they're not against, anything above average teams, but they are against division opponents, so that's always good. 4.5 games back, it's not terrible. Wild card, they're only 1.5 game back, I believe. So I suppose they're in that, obviously, but just as the season progresses, unless something drastically changes with the starting pitching, they're, going to be floating around 500 the rest of the way, probably.
And, of course, their offense is 19th in the league. And so, when you have that coupled along with the, perhaps the worst struggling pitching in the major leagues, like you alluded to, being 500 or somewhere close to that is probably what you're expecting. So looking ahead for the All-Star break, when they wrap up this 3-game set with the Blue Jays, they come home to face the Rays for a 3-game set. The Rays are 3 games above 500 and in third place in the American League East, 3 games back out of first. And then they hit the road for a 7-game road trip for the All-Star break in Milwaukee. 3-game set in Milwaukee, who is in first place, surprisingly, ahead of the Cubs in the NL Central at the time of the recording of this podcast. The Cubs are 1 game back, and then they go to a 4-game set with the Twins, who've kind of come back down to earth since they faced the Twins last. And, of course, earlier this season, they swept the Orioles. The Twins did at Camden Yards. And then all things will go to Miami while we focus on the All-Star break. I've kind of been harsh on Dan Duquette. I don't think him and Buck Showalter have a really good relationship. I know ever since the whole contract situation with the Blue Jays happened, I don't know that full story. I don't know what was going on behind the scene, but I just get the vibe that Duquette isn't putting in his everything that he has into the job right now. And he, is he? I heard an interesting. I think it was Jerry Coleman and Jason Lockenfora talking on the Be More Opinionated podcast, who, of course, both those guys have been helpful with coming on the podcast before. I certainly want to thank them. But they were talking about, whether Dan, as a year away from his contract expiring, as the Orioles sit, right at 500, are they going to be competitive? Are they not? Is he going to, do something to change things and set the Orioles up to be better in the future, or is he not going to do a whole lot and kind of, as long as the Orioles stay where they are pretty good, if they end up being a couple games out of the wild card he could still say they were in contention when really we know they really didn't have a shot at making the playoffs. Where do you think Duquette's head's at? Do you think he's more concerned about himself at this point, or do you think he really has a vested interest in improving the ball club?
That's an interesting point. I didn't know his contract specifics, but now that you mention that, that certainly looks like it's a factor, because the Orioles themselves are just in a tough situation as an organization. They have the core pieces of a team that can compete in the playoffs every year. Certainly a powerful offense. The pitching, it's iffy, but they have a decent core, and, they've been at 500 at worst this year. So I think Duquette might feel that pressure that he needs to, buy this year and try to just scrap something together as time might be running out for him. But, as Orioles fans, you hear everybody saying they should, sell, unload everything. And, that's because we're looking ahead for the future. But his mindset is probably still, near future, instead of the fans are probably looking way ahead.
And it's going to be interesting, especially you mentioned the Orioles being at a tough point here, what they're going to do, because both Duquette and Showalter's contracts expire at the end of next season, and a couple, both media members and fans have brought up the idea of possibly if Duquette does in fact leave, Buck Showalter, retiring from managing and possibly stepping in as a general manager, which I think would certainly, we know Buck cares about the organization. We know, he's got a relationship and a repertoire with all the guys. That'd be certainly be interesting to see if he was given the reins. That, definitely something to monitor and keep an eye on for the Orioles over the next 12 months, more than that really, about 15 months here before all that takes place. But moving on, as the Orioles get farther into the season, if they do, go on another tailspin, kind of like we've been seeing how they've been, particularly on the road where they've been really bad going on these long losing streaks, if they, find themselves really struggling around the trade deadline, they might want to start, shopping names, like a Zach Britton, for instance. I don't think at this point they're going to get anything for Chris Tillman because of how poorly he's performed and with the, the concerns with his shoulder. But, they have a really good, if Zach Britton comes back and is lights out, they could possibly get something for him. And you would still have Brock as your closer and O'Day as your eighth inning guy. I know Brad Brock isn't Zach Britton, but, if they are, willing to part ways with anybody right now, Zach Britton's probably the top name up there.
Yeah, I would agree. It's tough when, I have kind of slipped into that mindset of, we need to sell. But I look up and down the roster and, it's hard to find somebody that you'd be okay with them leaving the team. And, you think that we would be okay without them, that we could compete without them. And the bullpen has been consistently good year to year. I trust Buck and Duquette to put together a good bullpen every year. That's, one of their things that they've been able to do very well consistently. So I guess, we could be all right without him, but you really got to get something good out of him. You don't want to just sell him just for the sake of selling him. He's arguably the best closer in the game, and we've seen some trades with closers in the past year or two, then the teams that have traded away, Andrew Miller and Chapman, they've gotten some pretty good stuff in return. So they definitely have to get, the price would have to be right.
Right, and I'm just kind of trying to think, if they are going to be sellers, possible names, that come into play. Jimenez, Miley, and Tillman are all in contract seasons. I can, remember Duquette saying that Miley and Jimenez were going to pitch better this year, in contract years, which was one of the more laughable things I've heard him say. I don't think, between Tillman, Miley, and Jimenez, I don't think they're going to get absolutely anything for those guys. I don't think any team would be willing to take any of those guys on. I know teams would certainly be interested in a pitcher like Kevin Gausman, but I know he's, untouchable according to the Orioles. Another name they could possibly shop is, Wellington Castillo. I know they just brought him in this year to replace Matt Wieters, and I know he's got a club option next year, so not necessarily a free agent, with the option. But that's another name that they could he's been hurt, but he's been a contributor on offense. One of the better catchers in the American League, I'd say. Certainly has held up his end of the bargain, replacing Wieters. And they've got Chance Sisco in the minor leagues too. So if they're out of contention or slipping to that point towards the trade deadline, they might want to get rid of their of Castillo and then have Joseph as the regular catcher, and then Chance Sisco get some experience up here in the major leagues. And of course Caleb Joseph does struggle offensively, but he's a great defensive catcher, and whether it's been filling in for Matt Wieters before he came back from Tommy John, and whether it's been Castillo on the DL this year, when Joseph starts every day, he gets better in terms of consistency on offense and drives in more runs and is more productive offensively than he is when he's only playing every 3 or 4 days or whatever. What do you think of that possibility if shopping Castillo?
I would be against it unless they really just take a deep dive and really just sink in the standings and they go into full sell mode. I would be against it. We do have guys like Sisco, and they say that, the catching position is one of our deepest in the minors in terms of talent. But if I'm not mistaken, Sisco hasn't come up to the majors at all yet. So until he gets to a point like Mancini did last year where he's coming up and, getting at-bats and getting playing time, I don't feel comfortable getting rid of, a starting catcher like Castillo. And nothing against Joseph, he's a good guy, good backup catcher. But we said, kind of the same thing about him when, there was talk of letting Wieters go. And people said that Joseph could be that everyday guy. And it's just that I don't think that's a smart decision to have him be the starting catcher. Good quality backup, great defensive catcher, but I don't trust him as the everyday starter.
And 2 other quick names for Orioles fans to keep in mind as we approach the trade deadline is Seth Smith and Hyun-Soo Kim. Would you agree that those 2 could possibly be trade assets for a team looking for corner outfielders?
Yeah, I guess. But those are 2 guys that I would also be against. Even, I think when you want to rebuild, I think those are 2 guys that you probably want to have around.
Well, the issue with Kim, just the issue of not getting any playing time, which he has gotten more playing time as of late, but I know a couple, at the beginning of June and late May, he wasn't getting any playing time at all. And then the reason why I said Smith was he's 34 years old, and if they're going to rebuild, I don't think they're going to, next year he'll be 35. I don't know if they're going to want to have, a 35-year-old corner outfielder as a part of a rebuild, but if there is a contender that's willing to do a deal, I think they might be interested in shopping him.
Yeah, I probably just have a soft spot for Smith because he's one of those guys that, when he goes to the plate, just looking to get on base. It reminds me of Markakis in that sense. So, but yeah, I could see him leaving as well from an age perspective.
Moving on, Nolan McGraw again, Charm City Birdwatch, Ravens and Orioles Insider again, Nolan_MCG on Twitter. Moving on to the AllStar Game, which takes place in a couple weeks from Miami, Manny Machado's hometown. We know that no Orioles pitchers will be getting the prestigious honor of going down to Miami for the All-Star Game, but some possibilities. People have mentioned Jonathan Scope, people have mentioned Manny Machado, people have mentioned Trey Mancini, but how many of these guys, have a realistic shot of getting to the All-Star Game? And that's kind of hard to say. The most popular player certainly is Machado in terms of name and, what a story it would be to go back to his hometown, even if he was just competing in the Home Run Derby for the All-Star Game festivities. But there's a lot of other third basemen in the American League, Sano, Ramirez, Donaldson, Moustakas. Going to be interesting to see how Machado stacks up against those guys when they're probably all having better offensive seasons than he. I mean, we can't take away anything from Machado's defense, but really having a big down year in terms of offensive production.
Yeah, he's not having an all-star year, and he's been leading the vote. Might still be leading, if I'm not mistaken. But, there's definitely more deserving third basemen out there. But I do think Machado is probably going to end up getting the nod for the team, which is unfortunate because I do think, Scope, I would throw Castillo in there. I know he's missed time on the DL twice, but he's been very consistent. I would throw those names out there before Machado.
And if I'm going to pick one Oriole on the team that deserves to go to the All-Star game, I think it's Schoop. I agree with you on that. I agree with Castillo being in the conversation, but above Castillo, I think Trey Mancini. Had it not been he didn't play every day in April. He's certainly been playing through May and June, but he seemingly came out of nowhere. I have an interesting because he could be in line. People don't know who he is. The Orioles aren't a big market team, and then we've seen the surgence, the uprising of a guy like Aaron Judge, who not only plays for the Yankees, but is almost 300 pounds and hits, a good home run ball. So, of course, all the major sports outlets are never going to shut up about him. But I have, if the roles are reversed, if Aaron Judge played on the Orioles and if Trey Mancini played on the Yankees, what do you think? Do you think Mancini would be, talked about way more than Judge would be talked about?
Are they trading talent as well in that?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Same exact player. Like just if the players were reversed on different teams, if Mancini was a Yankee and Judge was an Oriole, would all the conversation be shifting to Mancini rather than Judge? Do you think?
I think you could probably guarantee that you get more media buzz just being in New York, but while it's annoying just because the Yankees are a division rival, I think Judge obviously deserves all the hype he's getting, because he's gotten the hype and he's kept the hype. He hasn't, trended downwards at all yet. He's staying hot at the plate, so he deserves the hype. But I do think if the roles were reversed, I think Mancini would be getting more of a buzz. But I think he's fine. Everybody's fine with him, being a quiet guy here with the Orioles.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm not taking anything away from Aaron Judge. I certainly think he's deserving of all the All-Star nods that he's getting. I think he does deserve to go to the All-Star game. I just think Trey Mancini. It's funny how he doesn't like it. It's great. That's a good thing about Baltimore is they're an underdog. They're not talked about nearly as much, but it's just funny. Literally nobody knows who he is. And he leads the Orioles in nearly every offensive category. And of course, Schoop has had more at bats than Mancini, so his batting average isn't going to be nearly as high. But those two guys, I believe, if there were going to be any selections to go from the Orioles to the All-Star game, I believe it's Schoop and Mancini, but I'm not sure either of those two guys is going to make it.
Yeah, like you said, the knock against Mancini is just the amount of starts and at bats. He's filled in for Chris Davis very nicely. Since Davis has been on the DL. And, when it comes time for Davis to return, you might have the conversation of, how do we try to keep Mancini in? Do we, move him to the DH position? Do we, let Davis DH? What do we do there? But, that's the only knock against Mancini is just playing time, in terms of getting an all-star vote or whatever.
And it'll certainly, all this talk about Machado possibly leaving once his contract expires, after next season, what the Orioles are going to do, if they're going to trade him or if they're going to try to re-sign him, all that, talk is for another day as that time gets closer. But if we talk about, a possible rebuild, if the Orioles aren't going to go anywhere with the current roster they have, I think a perfect, player for the Orioles to build around is Jonathan Schoop. Just the maturity he's shown this year, his fourth full major league season, he could certainly be the face, of the Orioles of the future, just given his growth and what he's done. Certainly been great to see everything that he's put together this season.
Yeah, definitely. Schoop is a great player, and I think, if you're going to deal Machado or worst case scenario, you end up watching him walk away in free agency, you're going to want to be aggressive with a contract going after a guy like Schoop and have him and, hopefully Mancini be those two offensive guys that you want to build around going forward.
This is the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. I'm the host, Jake McDonnell, JMcDonnell95 on Twitter. I'm here with Nolan McGraw, Charm City Birdwatch staff writer and insider. You can follow him on Twitter at Nolan_MCG. One last conversation topic before we sign you off. Dylan Bundy, of course, this is his first full season in the rotation, and the Orioles are starting to use some of their off days to his advantage. They're starting to give him a couple extra days here in between starts. It's going to be I'm very compelled to see how they handle him going forward, due to the fact that the possibility of them tanking towards the end of the season, and of course the history of Tommy John surgery and pitchers being shut down. I know Buck Showalter doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to want to shut a guy down, but if they plan on having Dylan Bundy around for years to come, and they're not contending, it might be the right thing to do if he keeps not going deep into games and not putting quality starts together and struggling like he has. Had a good start against Tampa Bay the other day, but put everything aside, the past month has been pretty much a struggle for him compared to the first month or two. So, if they're struggling going forward, shutting him down might be a necessity if they want to have him healthy for the next couple seasons.
Yeah, I'm all for, keeping a guy healthy like that, but it's just, that's the thing with the rotation this year is, if you're going to shut him down, even if you're in complete tank mode and you're at the bottom of the league, who's going to fill that spot? It's going to be a revolving door still. Even if you're losing, 9 out of 10 games, you can't keep throwing a guy like Ubaldo out there every 5 days or something, only going 2 runs. Then you're destroying, the rest of your pitching staff. So that's a tricky situation. Probably unlikely, if you ask me, that we would get to a point where he would be shut down, but especially since he's the team's number one, just seems kind of strange. But I'm all for preserving a guy for health.
And that's exactly where I was going to go with that topic. If they're going to shut him down, who is going to take his spot? Which is why if Dan Duquette really believes they're going to be contenders again this year, if he wants to trade for not an ace, but another starting pitcher, Scott Feldman like they did in 2013, I wouldn't be completely against that, just for the sake of if they do have to shut Bundy down, they at least have a little bit of a Band-Aid there to get them through the rest of the season in the rotation. But it will be compelling and interesting and exciting to see what they do with Dylan Bundy the rest of the way this season, as they try to preserve his health and his arm coming off the Tommy John surgery and his history involved with all that. So once again, thank you again for tuning in to this episode of the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. Again, as is mentioned down in the description box, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and SoundCloud and leave us a review. Tell us how we can make the podcast better, what you would like to see, all that other stuff, and make sure to check us out on CharmCityBirdwatch.com. Series previews and recaps for the Orioles. Of course, all breaking news and a little bit of an opinion and editorial like we had today with the Zach Orr possible coming out party as he attempts an NFL comeback. So, Nolan, good to catch up with you. Hope all is going well up at Shippensburg. And we will be sure to keep on rolling with our Ravens and Orioles coverage on CharmCityBirdwatch.com.